While the majority of Yugoloth history unfolds in the sulphurous dark of Gehenna, the bleak desolation of the Grey Waste, or other poisoned and war-torn lands across the lower plains, there are rare moments when their sinister plots and schemes spill into the mortal world to leave fiendish scars that will never heal. And for those of elven and human heritage, the fall of Myth Drannor is one such scar, a vile and bitter reminder of the evils of Yugoloth kind. It was called the Weeping War, a fiendish mark where mercenary ambitions and bloodlust slipped their leash and etched ruin upon the heart of Faerun. But the seeds of this tragedy were planted almost 2,000 years prior, and began as so many tragedies do, with mortal arrogance and a hunger for knowledge, power, and the illusion of control. In a time when the Netherese Empire had already begun rotting at its golden edges, Aldlas Sodhes, an arrogant Netherese arch-wizard, exiled for impious trespasses his peers dared not even contemplate, long hunted the secrets of the Nether Scrolls, rumored lost beneath the boughs of Corminthir. His means were not subtle, yet Aldlas was not the first, nor would he be the last, to believe himself clever enough to tangle with beings not of our world. Using dark powers, he breached into the lower planes to call forth 3 daemonic Yugoloths to aid in his search. They arrived with the stink of Gehenna in their wake, answering not as servants of their foolish mortal summoner, but as wolves let loose among lambs, bound in secret to the will of a fallen Solar whose hatred for the Seldarine burned hotter than any hellfire. His name was Malkazid the Branded, once a celestial champion of the elven pantheon. Betrayed by the goddess Lolth, then known as Araushni, Malkazid was exiled by his divine masters, his fall from grace curdling into a millennia-long vendetta. Unable to wage war directly against the gods who had cast him down, the corrupted Celestial directed his vengeance upon their most favored mortal children, viewing the fates of elves and the humans that supported them as nothing but pawns on a blood-slicked chessboard. The history books would come to name these fiends as the Trio Nefarious, 3 Yugoloths who were supremely skilled in the art of war. Almpatir, the strategist, Golguth, the warrior, and Malmanshare, the berserker. The Trio Nefarious were Malkazid's chosen instruments, the perfect mercenary fiends to build and command a force to execute an elven annihilation, one for which their true master could maintain plausible deniability. From the instant they crossed the boundary into the mortal world, the destruction was imminent and obscene. But this was not the artless rampage of a demonic horde. This was a symphony of methodical ruin, conducted by Almpatir with the signature cold precision of their kind. Led by the Trio Nefarious, a small army of unknown evils would catch the region off guard. Elven defenses were systematically dismantled, defenders herded into exquisitely prepared traps. Villages that had stood for centuries were razed to ruin, their sacred groves corrupted to break the spirit of the land itself. Entire tribes of centaurs and satyrs fled or were butchered for sport. Even the villainous and evil-aligned green dragons were not spared from the Trio Nefarious. The Yugoloths hunted them down with the focused patience of apex predators, claiming their hordes as payment due and leaving their colossal skeletons artfully displayed as a warning that no power in these woods was safe. The arch-wizard Aldlas never had control, and he never had a chance. His ambition ended as all such bargains do, with betrayal and a grave, his name becoming a footnote in an elegy to arrogant fools. Despite the disarray, the elves would soon respond to the fiendish attacks, gathering their greatest mages and warriors under Coronal Mirfus Irithil, a revered moon elf priest of Sionine Moonbow. The battle would take lives on both sides, but the elves would eventually complete a ritual of collective high magic to halt the fiendish onslaught, weaving an invisible ethereal prison of immense power and casting the trio into a hidden stasis above the city. As part of the ritual, they would need to seal the prison with a symbolic key. Having no intention of ever releasing these terrible fiends, they would call upon the surreal. Only a red dragon without greed or malice in its heart, passing above the coronal's throne, could undo the lock. A clause thought poetically impossible, a prayer written into the arcane fabric of the ward. Centuries would pass as memories eroded. New generations built atop silenced land as vine and root crept over old battlegrounds. Out of sight, out of mind. The invisible prison hung forgotten, as did its warning. That was until nearly 2 millennia later, when in 708 Dale Reckoning, fate would play its hand with a malice indistinguishable from fluke or fortune, and the poetically impossible was impossible no more. Garnet Alisar, a red dragon raised since birth by elves and pure of heart, would unknowingly write his name into elven history, when by sheer coincidence he flew over that very throne, instantly dissolving the ancient ward. Fate, still not satisfied with its role in the calamities to come, chose that very moment for an otherwise insignificant gnoll shaman to recite a fiendish summoning, furnishing the trio nefarious their opportunity to step from forgotten myth into elven tragedy. The freed Yugoloths wasted no time plotting their retribution as they began gathering what scholars would later record as the Army of Darkness. While the lore makes no mention of chainsaws, boomsticks, or a 1973 Oldsmobile, in the 2 years since their accidental freedom, the fiends had amassed a force of more than 3,000 monstrous soldiers. Initially comprised of goblins, orcs, trolls, and gnolls, they would soon be complemented by countless frontline Mesoloth daemons from Gehenna and an array of additional Yugoloth fiends from the Grey Wastes. The visceral war that followed would endure nearly 3 long years. It began in the mining camps in the western Moonsea, north of the river Tesh, in what would later become Zintel Keep. The camps were wiped from existence as the fiendish-led army made their way south through Ulash and Hillsfar. In the span of only a few short months, the forests of Cormanthor had become a crimson woodland of silence and vanished songs. Cormanthor's defenders, the Akvalar, or Army of Arms, bled for every yard gained, but their heroism paled before the crashing crimson waves of this fiendish tide. The trio nefarious, Ampatir commanding as a butcher commands his cleaver, Malimshare, a whirlwind of steel, and Golgoth striking unseen were nigh unstoppable. Human allies, elven blade singers, the mysterious harpers, all ground down, leaving only stories of sorrow and withering bones. Fiendish raids devoured the outlands until at last this army of darkness and retribution closed in to lay siege on the elven city of bards. While the siege did not create new enemies, it did present an opening for old ones, as Lolth's dark elf drow would seize upon the opportunity to tear at the defenders' flanks. Within the city, heroes rose and were spent, names lost to the crushing weight of elven history come to claim its due. In the final desperate days, valiant defenders would manage to slay the fiendish commanders one by one, but each was a costly, hard-won victory. Malimshare would be the first of the trio nefarious to fall. In battle alongside Golgoth, who himself would lose his left eye and an arm but find his escape, Malimshare would face off against a chosen of Mystra named Simrastar, whose spellfire would bring about his end. Golgoth's survival, however, would be short-lived, as his own death would soon follow. Grievously wounded, the Yugoloth would meet his fate at the hands of Anthan Nargold, the half-dwarf heir to Clan Nargold, in the Battle of Lost Trench. The last of Trio Nefarious, Ampatir, would fall months later near the war's end on Flame Rule 15 in the Year of Doom, 714 Dale Reckoning, slain by Captain Flar Starbow Melruth in the battle known as Bane's Duel. Yet these were hollow triumphs. Death came for the fiends, but it was a final bitter irony, arriving only after Mithranor's fate was sealed, the epilogue to a dark elven tragedy they had already finished writing. The lore is unclear on the total dead among the remnant ruins, but many accounts leave less than 200 escaping survivors from a total force said to far exceed 10,000, leading this war to become one of the most tragic chapters in elven history. In the aftermath, the woods grew quiet, but to record this as only a tragedy of loss is to miss the point entirely. The Yugoloths did not lose even in their own deaths, for their aim was never conquest. In sacrifice, they broke mortal spirits, poisoned its lands, and eternally stained the pages of their history books. But there is a lesson to learn from this war, an irony that will be forever written into the sorrowful hymns that lament the cruel fate of the City of Song. The lower planes have little patience for mortal arrogance. When their mercenary fiends are called upon, the price is always paid, and it is rarely counted in gold alone. The treatise that follows does not seek to demonize or exonerate these fiends, for Yugoloths require neither. However, their story and this discovery, when told in full, demands honesty and offers warning to any who deal with their kind. Do not search for the Yugoloth's hand in your affairs, but rather for the subtle strings they may have attached. When one considers the great fiendish powers of the lower planes, dark scholarly minds often first gravitate toward the iron-fisted legions of hell, or the seething, numberless hordes of the abyss. Yet in the demonic Yugoloths, we find a third fiendish pillar also exists, showcasing its own distinct form of immorality. Overlooked, perhaps by design, this sinister power operates not by the dictates of tyrannical law or the chaotic freedom of unchecked fury. What then is evil when stripped of such strictures and anarchy? When its only vow is to self-interest, its loyalty bound only to the ledger, and where malice is not a passion, but instead a profession? The answer, of course, lies with the neutral evil doctrines of the Yugoloth, which clearly stand apart from any other fiend on the lower planes. Devils seek to dominate the world with their infernal rules, while demons endlessly tear those rules apart with the bloodlust and rage of anarchy. Yugoloths, however, neither build nor burn such constructs for the sake of creed or principle alone. They are not chained by laws or consumed by chaos. They have no wish to be champions of any external cause, and they do not kill in the name of some unseen divine power. Their involvement in the Blood War, the single most enduring conflict across the multiverse, is not fueled by loyalty or hate, but simply by personal gain. They are vendors of its inevitable violence, offering their services, their armies, their knowledge, even sabotage and betrayal to whichever side pays best, and often secretly to both sides at once. They exist as a neutral form of evil, not out of apathy, but out of conviction. Theirs is a streamlined ethos: take what you can, betray when you must, and always charge more than the service is worth. The Yugoloths call this a pure evil. What follows in this study of fiendish philosophy is mostly unearthed from the exceptional writings and lore of the 2nd edition text, where the overwhelming majority of Yugoloth lore resides. As we begin our deep dive, I'm required to start with some foundational history to provide some clarification and properly frame our discoveries to follow. In the 1st edition text, the creatures that would become Yugoloths were introduced as daemons almost 5 decades ago, first found in the 1E adventure module D3, Vault of the Drow, in 1978, and would later be published in the 1st edition Monster Manual number 2 in 1983. And it is also here that we learned these daemons hailed from not one but 3 of the outer planes: Gehenna, along with Hades, which is more commonly called the Grey Waste today, as well as Tartarus, which today we call Carceri. However, with the 2nd edition, and specifically the launch of the fantastic Planescape setting, a new set of fiendish nomenclature would be unveiled. Savvy lore veterans and regular viewers of this channel will know that the Planescape launch roughly coincided with an event known as the Satanic Panic. The ensuing fear-mongering from moms to preachers across the United States forced TSR, the publishers of D&D at the time, to move away from what this moral panic considered the controversial names of devil, demon, and daemon, introducing in their place the Batazu, Tanari, and the subject of our exploration today, the Yugoloths. It would take only a few short years before this irrational outrage would subside, allowing devil and demon to once again grace the pages of Dungeons & Dragons mini-tomes. But Yugoloth stuck, becoming the permanent replacement for the daemonic fiends, at least officially. And I do think this was a smart move, given the similarities between daemon and demon that were a constant source of confusion across many tables. And while many players, dungeon masters, and world builders, myself included, often still use both Yugoloth and daemon interchangeably, Yugoloth is the official designation and the one I will most often reference as we continue our discoveries. That out of the way, our path ahead is now crystal clear. And if you actually believe that, then you are what the Yugoloths would call an easy mark. Like all lore, there are conflicts, contradictions, retcons, and straight-up deception that lie ahead. We're dealing with perhaps the most solipsistic of beings in the outer planes and beyond, after all, so we should expect nothing less. Many of these discrepancies and deceptions are based on in-universe lore, tainted by the biased agendas of narcissistic authors, while others breach into the real-world meta of changing editions, cosmologies, and publishers. But hopefully, if I have done my job, at the end of our time together, you will like, subscribe, and join my Patreon for a single $1 a month. Wait, that's the wrong script. My bad. I meant to say that at the end of our time together, we will have successfully identified each, providing the necessary context and evidence so that you may draw your own conclusions on what is truth, what is intentional obfuscation, and what is nothing more than dirty fiendish lies. If we view this fiendish examination through an ideologic lens, the triumvirate of lower planes fiends are traditionally framed in a triptych style. Devils on one side representing tyranny enshrined in the rule of infernal law, and demons on the other, the avatars of anarchy and unbridled destruction. Then at the center we find the Yugoloths, representing the alignment of neutral evil. Lawful evil seeks disciplined conquest and dominion. Chaotic evil represents the endless pursuit of the discordant freedom nihilism brings. Yugoloths view both as equally flawed, but will happily accommodate either, or both, for the right price. Their loyalties are never sold, only rented to the highest bidder. To the Yugoloth, neutral evil is in no way a compromise between those two evil extremes. They do not see themselves as that midpoint, but instead the apex, the zenith of what evil becomes when it sheds all moral ornamentation and wears only its raw utility. Yugoloth culture does not reject infernal law or abyssal chaos with a hatred born of sworn enemies. The Batasu devils and Tanari demons are their best customers after all. No, the Yugoloth simply discard both ends of that wicked spectrum as distractions. Simply put, the passions that devils and demons wear so proudly as badges of their convictions, the Yugoloth culture sees only as an unnecessary burden. Concepts such as pride, honor, and certainly trust are considered nothing more than liabilities, each a costly indulgence that only dilutes the true potential of evil. Even anger is viewed as a contaminant, a primal weakness that clouds the mind. To the Yugoloth, emotional detachment is not the absence of feeling, but a discipline that is required to master the art of manipulation. And it is this belief that both law and chaos are corrupting influences that underpins the Yugoloth's arrogant claim to be the only true fiend. If those words bring to mind some form of high-functioning psychopathy, then you, my astute friend, are definitely paying attention. The Yugoloth of this perfect evil operate with callous logic and apathetic method as a matter of routine, yet wear deceitful masks of emotion to feign empathy, camaraderie, or loyalty at will in order to manipulate those who might stand in the way of advancing their hidden schemes and agendas. And the Yugoloths are masters of this art of deception, able to change these emotional facades as easily as they don their cloaks or unsheathe their blades. Even the act of torture to the Yugoloth is a dispassionate practice, its use one of many pragmatic tools to be leveraged as needed, not a product of sadism or finding any perverse pleasure like that of a sociopath. Yet it must be said that like many who hold to such rigid ideals, Yugoloths do at times fail to live up to their own lofty standards. Their claims of having purged all emotion are, at best, half-truths, something that will become more obvious as our study deepens. And despite openly flaunting their status as beings of pure, irredeemable evil, there do exist the exceedingly rare cases of Yugoloths who have turned away from this sinister nature. Likely the best example of this can be found on the pages of Dragon magazine number 351, where we meet the Philosopher King, a neutral good ultraloth named Felthus ap Geron, who proves that no rule is absolute. Of course, such instances are typically dismissed or repressed by Yugoloth culture, but just the existence of these outliers is evidence that their glorified claims of immunity to the influence of law, chaos, or good is at best just another doctrine to be enforced. And for a race of beings that try so very hard to define themselves by the embodiment of perfect evil, the potential for even one of their kind to embrace what they call corrupting influence is a flaw they can neither explain nor admit. At the root of Yugoloth existence is the foundational principle of sinister self-interest. And no better phrase of common words better exemplifies this philosophy of avarice and greed than, "What's in it for me?" A question you might ask yourself each time you hear me talk about my Patreon. And the answer is easy: more lore and the opportunity to direct your own discovery video for this very channel, like this one chosen and directed by Darwin. No soul-binding contracts and no fine print. Links below. Among their kind, this otherwise routine and often used reply is the closest you will find to any type of divine Yugoloth scripture, serving as the bedrock of their ideals and the base algorithm from which all other actions derive legitimacy. The Yugoloth's only virtue, if such a term must be used, lies in the accumulation of profit, whether measured in souls, gold, power, or influence. And it is this singular focus that serves as justification for their many crimes, all giving rise to what is best described as a behavioral paradox. Yugoloths see no intrinsic worth in concepts such as compassion, loyalty, or faith, unless of course those concepts can be exploited for the politics of their own gain, something that hits far too close to the real world than I care to admit nowadays. And you can make a strong case that their brand of neutral evil is more pernicious and certainly more unpredictable than anything you will find in the Nine Hells or on any layer of the Abyss. And it is this unpredictability that many planar scholars will insist makes their neutral evil nature the most sinister of all evils. The Yugoloth's neutral component of such evil should never be mistaken for disinterest or lacking in motive. Instead, their neutral temperament presents as the best or worst of both extremes, witnessing the spiteful wrath of a demon or the methodical cruelty of a devil, all as needed, unburdened by any sinful dogma other than greed. In this way, the same fiend might, upon first meeting a stranger, greet him with a blade to the throat, or, if it serves another hidden purpose, offer warm regards followed by a masterful sales pitch. But you would do well to just walk away. Yugoloths have taken the concept of betrayal to new lows. They are infamous traitors, well known for their proclivity to backstab even their allies. Numerous are the witnessed battlefield accounts of these daemonic mercenaries under contract turning on its employer or sponsor mid-battle, double-crossed for increased coin. And this disloyalty has few if any limits, being just as quick to betray their own kind if it means a promotion or a greater share of the spoils. In what the daemons unofficially call their arithmetic of advancement, loyalty is a temporary commodity, holding a value that depreciates with every passing moment a better offer is on the table. But perhaps the only trait that better defines the Yugoloth than their endless avarice is their mastery of lies and deception. They are, by almost any metric, the greatest deceivers in the multiverse. Their skills in manipulation so refined, even devils must give a tip of the horn. Masters of trickery, bluffs, and misdirection, the Yugoloths are unrivaled in the spinning of deceitful webs, and there are countless legends and fables that tell of tricked mortals who were fully aware and supposedly prepared for Yugoloth lies. All this, of course, leads any reasonable mind to then question why, if the Yugoloth's treachery is such an open secret, do the devils and demons continue to employ their services at all? The answer is not found in ignorance. Both the Batazu and Tanar'ri are acutely aware of and despise the Loth's nature. However, both factions are caught in what is a paradox of the Blood War, a strategic stalemate where the cost of not interacting with the Yugoloths would be far greater than any price of their inevitable betrayal. If one side were to in fact stop employing their mercenary services, the other side would surely seize the advantage, tipping the tides of war. And so the Yugoloths persist as the realm's lore equivalent of Comcast or Ubisoft, relishing in their greedy role as the most hated of contractors, a problem that both the demons and devils pay handsomely to perpetuate, making them, pun very much intended, a necessary evil. To the Yugoloth, there is nothing that cannot be bargained, gained, taken, or sold, an amorality that extends to the Yugoloth stance on the divine. Yugoloths engage in no known worship to deities, gods, or unseen higher powers, and their kind hold no priests or clerics among its ranks. It's not that they do not believe in the gods, atheism being especially difficult to practice in realms lore with such high-profile pantheons. No, to the Yugoloths, gods are very real. However, they are perceived as just another entity to be engaged or exploited, but never revered. A fact made all too clear the moment anyone, mortal or god, lays eyes on the wasting tower of Kinoin, the seat of power for the ruling lord of the Yugoloth, known as the Oinoloth. You will find no prayers spoken, no altars knelt to in that unholy citadel upon the Grey Wastes. What is most notable about the spire is its construction, built from the flayed spine of, quote, the first god who tried to cross the Yugoloths, end quote. It is a towering symbol of their view on the divine. However, in spite of that clear lack of divinity, the Yugoloths are not without their own tenets, and if they did have any sort of unholy book, it would likely contain the following doctrines. Greed is not tolerated, it is celebrated. Loyalty is fleeting, and cruelty is not an indulgence, it is to be deployed with measured intent. Even the act of betrayal is not the breach of trust most would associate. It is a natural and logical conclusion. Besides, if you placed your trust in a Yugoloth, well, that was your mistake. There is power in the unknown, power in the void, in the omission, in the deliberate fracture of history. No one understands this better than the Yugoloths. Yugoloth origins are a study in contradiction and ambiguity, a puzzle whose pieces never quite fit together cleanly, no matter how they are arranged. No single tale confidently explains their genesis, no divine hand claims creation, and there are no mortal histories that record their arrival without substantial doubt and caveat. And what stories and mythologies do exist are filled with false starts, laced with bias, contradiction, and margins lined with the implausible. No other fiendish race has so thoroughly transformed the mysteries of its own beginning into such an instrument of manipulation. Theirs is a culture that values secrets as currency, and nowhere is the stockpile greater than in the question of where they came from and why they exist at all. If no outsider can confidently state the Yugoloths' role in the cosmos, then no one can truly know their limits or design, leaving the fiends free to select whichever mythos best serves their present goals. It should be noted that the origin stories to follow are not compatible, but are intentionally inconsistent. But the goal was never coherence, it was confusion, because where there is doubt and conjecture, there is the power to shape the narrative. Still, while very little about the Yugoloths come with any assurance, this would not be much of a discovery if we did not at least attempt to unravel its secrets. The oldest and most cited account of Yugoloth genesis is recorded on the pages of what is perhaps their most infamous historical tome, the Book of Derelict Magics, a Yugoloth-authored chronicle dripping in bias and riddled with distortions and self-serving contradiction. Dubious to all but the Yugoloth faithful, this origin story speaks of an ancient time when the primal cosmic forces of good and evil, law and chaos, each warred for dominance of the nascent world. During this primordial conflict, the Grey Waste spawned the Yugoloths, ancient fiends whose own existence is not without its own muddy waters. The Yugoloths, as primordial evils, are said to have devised a method by which evil might secure its earliest victory. The Yugoloths, so the story claims, were created to this end as the first of the truly perfected fiends, born beneath the looming presence of Kinoin, the Wasting Tower. However, this questionable legend asserts their perfection was soon threatened by the lingering taint of law and chaos. Yugoloth kind risked dissolution as their pure evil became slowly diluted by these competing strands of influence. It would be the first Ultraloth, later immortalized as the General of Gehenna, that would seek a solution. From the depths of Kinoin, this Ultraloth forged the Heart of Darkness, a gemstone of unimaginable potency. The Book of Derelict Magics tells its readers that he brought this artifact of evil purification to Gehenna in order to purge all trace of law and chaos from the souls of these perfect Yugoloth fiends. Yet not all of daemonkind would welcome this excision. Some, clinging to the remnant impure influences, fled back to the grey wastes of Hades. In the events that followed, those corrupting residues of law and chaos are said to have been infused with the spawning soul larvae of the Grey Wastes, a process that would see the creation of other fiendish races. Those larvae stained with law finding their way to Beator, giving rise to the Batazu devils, while the Chaos Touch spawn would drift into the abyssal depths to become the forebearers of the Tanar'ri demons. This, any Yugoloth will insist, clearly explains the uneasy kinship and eternal rivalry between the three fiendish races. And that first Ultraloth, now suffused with the Heart of Darkness's terrible clarity, would become the General of Gehenna, a figure whose own mythic stature in Yugoloth culture is matched only by the ambiguity of his actual nature. Yet no sooner than you turn the final page of this fable, its narrative is seemingly undercut by the Yugoloths themselves, or at least those rare few that have spoken on the matter. Some insist they never created the Yugoloths, claiming instead that they simply offered advice to a primordial force and then let things play out as they would. Others allege to remember nothing at all, as if to say even the architects of evil have secrets they cannot or will not reveal. This legend is both a claim to Yugoloth supremacy and a denial of responsibility, and in either guise it serves to frustrate any search for definitive answers, exactly as the writings intended. I will spend very little time on another highly questionable theory I hesitated to even examine, but must for the sake of completeness. This speculative work is found in the text of 4th edition lore and is unofficially called the theory of demonic lineage. And while I cannot stress just how much salt should be taken with this 4E supposition, the writings are quick to proclaim that Yugoloths are a genetic offshoot of demonkind, spawned as a subspecies by a forgotten or intentionally concealed demon prince. This reading of their history finds only thin support in the behavior of Yugoloths, specifically their willingness to side with the demons during Asmodeus' hurling of the abyss into the elemental chaos in the aftermath of the Spell Plague. Itself a candidate for the title of most outlandish fringe theory, and one later recanted whole cloth in the 5th edition text, leaving this myth to find support only among the most fervent of 4th edition scholars. Moving away from sheer fantasy, and yes, the irony is not lost on me, to the more modern texts, we find what is perhaps the most plausible origin myth recently uncovered and widely accepted in 5th edition circles. This theory is called the Night Hag Commission. This 5e version of Yugoloth origin lore posits that the sovereign lord of the Nine Hells, Asmodeus, desiring an army of fiends unbound by the strictures of Beator and thus capable of operating with a level of infernal deniability, commissioned a coven of powerful night hags to craft and create the Yugoloths from their dark magic cauldrons on the outer plane of Gehenna. Central to this creation mythos are a series of ledgers called the Books of Keeping, each inscribed by the Hag Sisterhood with the true names of all Yugoloths they made, except for the General of Gehenna. These books, originally said to be 4 in number but later rumored to be as many as 10, served as the chains of control for these new fiends. The books are said to also contain true names of a few demon lords and archdevils, suggesting that the Hag's power perhaps extended beyond their Yugoloth creations. However, the tale continues that due to infighting and treachery so common among Hag sisterhoods, the Books of Keeping were eventually lost, stolen, or perhaps even destroyed. This pivotal event is celebrated in Yugoloth folklore as their liberation, the moment they broke the shackles of their would-be masters. The best evidence for this origin story having merit is the existence of Ultraloths, variant Yugoloth fiends transformed by a ritual known only to night hags. Now, I know that many veteran lore scholars will push back on the Night Hag 5e origin story, which I completely understand. However, I do think it's important to acknowledge that the authors of the 5th edition text did not simply pull this theory out of thin air. The roots of this newer creation mythos date back to the 2nd edition, where writings found in the Dragon Magazine Annual No. 2 from 1997 first detailed the Night Hag's dark magic ritual using the waters from the river Styx and soul larvae in the creation of the Ultraloth. I think the 5e authors at least deserve some credit for plausibly tying the Night Hag creation myth almost seamlessly into canonical legacy lore of the Yugoloths, which I personally appreciate. And if I can stay meta for just a moment longer, let's be candid here. For as much as I like elements of the Bernoloth and Heart of Darkness origin story, it obviously loses me and most scholars with the absurdity and unacceptable conflict it shares with the many established and competing Batazu and Tanar'ri origins, which we must not forget was always the design intent with the Book of Derelict Magics, to frame the Yugoloths as the big fat liars of the Outer Planes. This leaves a significant void in finding a Yugoloth origin story that can be accepted outside of the inner circle of daemonic propagandists, a gap that this new 5e lore valiantly attempts to fill. And I have been among the first to criticize historic retcons that overwrite legacy lore, as was so prevalent in the 4e text. I think I speak for many DMs and world builders in advocating for new lore when required, being additive and compatible with the game's past, as opposed to destructive. And this 5th edition origin story does just that, which must be applauded in my opinion. And at the end of the day, these are Yugoloths we're talking about, so the historical accuracy of any origin story is going to be inherently dubious. Yugoloth texts are notoriously unreliable, penned by authors whose nature is defined by deception and manipulation. In Yugoloth culture, the greatest liars are celebrated. Their most convincing forgeries become canon. Even madness is leveraged, with some histories so riddled with insanity that interpretation becomes nearly impossible. As mentioned, non-Yugoloth accountings of Bernoloth encounters have consistently returned with their own denials in creating the Yugoloths. However, to some, given the Bernoloth's own reputation for spreading misery as well as misinformation, these denials carry very little definitive weight. And yet there are still other accountings, recordings written from obscure and forgotten Yugoloth authors that only further add confusion, hinting at an even broader creator role for the Bernoloths. There are both texts and oral histories suggesting Bernoloth influence extended to the genesis of the Oberiths, the ancient predecessors of the Tanar'ri demons, and even a proto-race of ancient Batorian devils. There are cryptic writings that tell of an Oberith lord from Yinogu's realm named Beshart, the Rotting Husk. Slowly dying, unmoving for millennia, the texts offer that in his rare and final moments of lucidity, the eldritch demon spoke of a race of creators described as very Bernoloth-like. Another tale tells of a many-eyed prophet known as Kabiri, the Watching Master, also an Oberith lord who had abandoned the Queen of Chaos after foreseeing her failures. This mythos concludes with Kabiri confronting the Bernoloths with this knowledge, only to be subsequently imprisoned in the wells of darkness for his temerity, his eventual fate unknown. And then there is the most blasphemous of Yugoloth legends, a tale involving Pale Night, the Oberith matriarch and primordial demoness. Her rumored unholy and frankly repulsive union with a Bernoloth is said to have spawned some of her abyssal offspring, suggesting Yugoloth connections far deeper and far older than any written record, adding yet another layer of haze to their fiendish lineage. And finally, we have the origins of the Yugoloths, also known as Demodans. These native fiends of Carceri are also laced with Yugoloth and Bernoloth mythology. In a Yugoloth-authored version of this history, a Bernoloth named Apomps was responsible for the creation of the Yugoloths, fashioning them from either the corpses of dead Yugoloths or as entirely new creations. Apomps, however, was met with shame and punished by his peers for his crime of chaos-tainted creativity, ultimately exiled with his Yugoloth progeny to the prison plane of Carceri. This biased narrative, however, leaves unexplained the Yugoloths' own subsequent mass exodus from the neutral-aligned Grey Waste to Gehenna, a plane that represents the ethical opposite of the chaotic lands of Carceri in terms of its own lawful-leaning neutrality. What emerges from the conflicting maze of texts are not histories, or really even mythologies. They are each part of a deliberate construction supporting Yugoloth philosophy and ideals. Every contradiction, every falsehood, designed to ensure that those seeking truths about their origin are forced to walk upon the most unstable of ground. Whether they are in fact the children of the Bernoloths, the products of night hag sorcery, the cousins of demons, or something stranger still, Yugoloths remain defined by the power of myth and the mastery of ambiguity. Their history cannot be pinned down, and it is in this refusal to be known that they are most dangerous. The hierarchy and structure of Yugoloth society presents itself as a paradox of power. To the view of outside observers, it is a feudal system, a collection of delineated territories across the blasted grey wastes of Hades, Gehenna, and the lower planes, each commanded by an anointed daemon lord. In practice, however, this is mostly pretense. These dominions are ruled by fiends wearing ceremonial titles, governed amidst seditious conflict and ever-shifting allegiances, each riddled with the Byzantine schemes one would expect from a race of mercenary deceivers born of ambition. And the reality is, more often than not, this Yugoloth vision of perfect evil is neither stable nor perfect, as various factions and cabals each interpret perfection through their own selfishly warped lens, resulting in a state of near constant warfare. Beneath this turbulent surface, the actual machinery of Yugoloth hierarchy diverges fundamentally from the infernal order of devils or the chaotic bedlam of demons. Yugoloth ascendancy is achieved by sharpening command of the far more subtle arts of deceit and coercion, and doing so while navigating the fog of subterfuge that saturates every interaction. Those of higher station are most often weaker in terms of raw power and physical might than their lesser-ranked subordinates, yet they are expected to maintain authority through fear, intimidation, and reputation as the illusion of power. In fact, for Yugoloths, the act of ruling itself is an exercise in the performance of authority, requiring the careful balancing of threats and half-promises to keep lesser fiends in line. This creates a feedback loop of fear and suppression, reinforced by authority grounded in the occasional demonstration of actual power. Although physically weaker, ruling Yugoloths almost always possess various methods to back up called bluffs through access to resources, secrets, or alliances. Still, Yugoloth history is filled with shows of force that were not always successful, such as the life of a ruling Yugoloth. Yugoloth society is thus stratified according to a hierarchy grouped into 4 broad categories or tiers. Occupying the bottom rung are fiends unofficially referred to as least Yugoloths. These are mostly outsiders that hold roles aligned to specific purposes and are not considered true members of the race. They are tools, incapable of the ambition or rebellion that normally defines their kind. This caste includes battle-loths that serve as literal living weapons, Canoloths, resembling a monstrous fusion of insect and warhound deployed as guards and trackers. Guardian daemons exist as 3 increasingly powerful variants, each created for the express purpose of answering mortal summons, serving as proxies for their true masters. The insectoid Scaroloths, pathetic and witless, are favored for infiltration and espionage, and rounding out the least tier are Vors, immense and loyal brutes that provide muscle and protection for their fiendish superiors. Above them, the lesser tier form the first true Yugoloths and most serve as the backbone of the fiendish armies. This includes the 4-armed Mesoloth and the truly strange Durgoloth, each filling the roles of frontline infantry and shock troops. Overseeing these soldier fiends are the tyrannical crustacean fiends known as the Pizkoloth, filling the role of cruel military sergeants. Playing the fiendish equivalent of the SEAL team are the amphibious and decidedly not seal-looking Hydroloths. These toad-like daemons are underwater and ambush specialists, most notable as one of the few known creatures immune to the memory-erasing waters of the river Styx. Climbing the lesser tier, we find the lopsided and malformed Yagnoloths, fiendish administrators given and prone to abusing their authority, widely considered to be the most hated of their species. Finally, rounding out the lesser ranks are the undead-looking but fully fiendish Marinoloths. These skeletal ferrymen of the river Styx not only hold the top rank among the lesser tier, but are unique in that they are mostly free agent fiends, their specialized role earning them a level of freedom and independence similar to that of greater Yugoloths. It is from this teeming mass of ambitious, lesser daemonic servitors that all greater Yugoloths must eventually rise from. At the pinnacle of the rank-and-file hierarchy are the greater Yugoloths, elite commanders and architects of the race's grand plots, schemes, and conspiracies. This upper echelon includes the Nikoloths, the arrogant 800-pound winged fiends who featured in our opening prologue, that serve as a powerful, elite winged fighting force. At the opposite end of the physical might spectrum are the jackal-headed aristocratic deal-making scribes known as the Arcanoloths. But do not let their scrawny arms or lack of heavy weapons fool you. The Arcanoloths count some of the greatest arcane masters among their kind. At the top of the greater tier stands the truly mysterious and alien-like Ultraloths, faceless cosmic masterminds and undisputed rulers who guide the Yugoloth agenda with supreme intellect and the cold demeanor of sterile, distant evil. Departing from the rank-and-file hierarchy is where we find the Yugoloth lords, unique masters who exist outside any normal progression or advancement. These include the Ultraloths, mentioned in Chapter 5. These are created Yugoloths of any rank or variant, elevated through the Night Hag's secretive rituals. The Bernoloths, also mentioned previously, may or may not even be true Yugoloths, and are also the dubious primordial creators of the race, and now reclusive advisors. Standing at the apex of the Yugoloth Lord hierarchy is the singular Oinoloth, which I will cover a bit later in Chapter 8. There exist other hierarchy-adjacent creatures that reside beyond the formal Yugoloth ranks. These include Corruptors of Fate, foul-smelling corpulent Yugoloth assassins that take great pleasure in their work, especially against other Corruptors. Needless to say, these fiends prefer to work alone, and do not be fooled by their abundant girth, as they are quite capable of moving unseen. Their namesake comes from their role as agents of ill luck, leveraging their signature ability to manipulate the fortunes of their enemies. But my favorite aspect of the Corruptor of Fate is found on page 190 of the Monster Manual 4 for the 3rd edition. There we are told that as the Corruptor of Fate attacks, a smell of brimstone emanates from its body as a faint sound of rolling dice can be heard by its victim. Echeinoloths are tentacled, Lovecraftian-inspired outsiders who often served in the rear echelon of the daemonic armies, where they take great delight in the devouring of the remnant foes that litter the battlefields. And the Gacholoths, sleek, onyx-skinned outsiders with 4 legs and semi-feline traits. They excel as infiltrators and saboteurs, executing missions that require stealth and subterfuge. Many of these fiends, especially the Oinoloth, among a few others, deserve far more time to profile than we have today. If you have a favorite Yugoloth you'd like to see profiled in a dedicated volume, be sure to comment below and let me know. For our purposes in this discovery, it is enough to understand this fundamental division between the masters, their servants, and the tools they both wield in the endless pursuit of their perfect, untainted evil. Okay, but how does a Yugoloth get promoted, I hear you ask? Hierarchical advancement proceeds along a linear path with no shortcuts or alternate routes. This means all Yugoloths start at the bottom and must serve time at each rank. There are no double promotions or rank skips by virtue of achievement, talent, or favor, as is so often the case in the Infernal system, for example. While this is the stated mandate, a pedantic scholar might take issue with the creation of the Ultraloths as, in fact, both a shortcut and an alternate route, but I digress. Regardless, each fiend must serve and/or endure a prolonged tenure in their current rank, and accumulated service time alone is not enough. One must master the specific perversion of power that each rank represents. Still, even for the prepared and experienced, Yugoloth promotion is a brutal affair. When a Yugoloth judges itself ready, it can petition its superiors for a review, initiating a process that can take decades or even centuries. I suspect the centuries-long potential wait has a lot to do with the Mafia, Goodfellas-inspired system, whereby the superior must vouch for the fiendish candidate during its promotion, an act which can result in a far worse fate than even the petitioner suffers for failure. That said, should the request be granted, the candidate will face a circle of Yugoloth judges composed of fiends 2 castes higher than itself. The petitioner's track record of evil accomplishments and notable achievements will be reviewed, along with the petitioner being subjected to relentless scrutiny, probing questions, and a psychological assault, all testing the candidate's evil purity. Failure results in death or possible demotion for the candidate, but as mentioned, it is the candidate's superior who likely pays the most grave cost, being flayed and exiled for daring to recommend such an inferior or not ready petitioner. For any petitioner to advance, each judge must be satisfied that the candidate passes 3 primary criteria. Did the candidate learn all the lessons of their current rank? Each rank has varying and specific instruction and knowledge to be acquired. Did they serve well in the current rank? No screw-ups. The Yugoloth must perform its duties flawlessly for centuries or longer before promotion. And does the petitioner exhibit ideals in line with the purity of evil? It is only when this circle of judgment is satisfied that the petitioner can proceed to the purification ritual, likely followed by a deep sigh of relief from the recommending fiend. Typically held on Mungoth, the third layer of Gehenna, this gruesome rite is designed to erase any trace weakness harbored in their previous form, wiping the slate clean before taking on their new variant incarnation. There, near the peak of a large volcano, the secret ritual is performed as the petitioner is bathed in the acidic fusion of ash, snow, and rain before being slain with a ceremonial blade forged from magma, obsidian, and the souls of the damned. This promotion party concludes with the petitioner's lifeless corpse being cast into the volcano where it is unmade. Somehow, from somewhere, perhaps the charred bones, there are no eyewitness accounts that I'm aware of or a handbook, is said to emerge a newly formed Yugoloth of the next higher rank, retaining all lessons and memories but born anew from the torment. And in a few centuries or millennia, rinse and repeat, again and again and again, over a dozen times. Promotion is pain, and a visceral reaffirmation of the Yugoloth principle that power must be earned and paid for in blood and suffering, a lesson no Yugoloth is soon to forget. In a society defined by such an arduous climb for power, certain figures have risen to such prominence that their names are spoken with fear, respect, or warning across the lower planes. There are warlords, masterminds, and unique fiends who have transcended beyond the standard castes, wielding influence that shapes the destiny of their race and the course of the blood war itself. Among these notable and named, a few figures inspire the combination of awe, terror, and reverence among the demonic fiends as the General of Gehenna. If one is so inclined as to place heavy stock in these biased legends, then the General of Gehenna holds power that approaches that of a demigod. The General's origins are deliberately obscured, wrapped in the contradictory, as is the Yugoloth way. Some tales claim he is the first Ultraloth, the architect of the Heart of Darkness, while others insist he is a returned Baernaloth, a primordial from eras long past, now a returned evil given new form. He is said to roam the volcanic slopes of Gehenna within his mobile fortress, the Crawling City, and conveniently can be found only if he wishes it. Ambitious Ultraloths undertake perilous journeys just to seek his counsel or be granted a sliver of his power, yet few return successful, and some are never seen again. For a race of fiends often fractured by their selfish ideals, the General's word is the one thing held sacrosanct, a decree capable of uniting all factions. Even the Oinoloth of the Wasting Tower, ruler of the Yugoloth, would not dare to fabricate a command from the General. Revered in such a way as to cast doubt on the Yugoloth's very own claim to never worship unseen gods, the General of Gehenna is a deific figure whose own revelation-inspired scripture offers a persistent, if questionable, legend that warns should the General within his crawling city ever enter the blood war, it would herald the final apocalyptic battle, followed by the Yugoloth's complete domination of the multiverse. And when I say crawling city, that is not metaphor or symbolism. According to the apocryphal writings within the Book of Derelict Magics, the crawling city from which this godlike Ultraloth resides is in fact a great sprawling metropolis of obsidian and ash that literally crawls across the impossible hellscapes of Gehenna. But what is most surreal and, frankly, quite horrifying about this daemonic city is the method by which this mobility is achieved, facilitated by thousands of fire-immune legs, presumably those of the many souls collected, grafted to the underside of this colossal moving city. Legend? fable, or perhaps more Yugoloth propaganda? I'll leave that to your common sense. If the General of Gehenna plays the legendary role of unseen Yugoloth god, then the Oinoloth would be their diseased king. The Oinoloth is not so much a distinct form of Yugoloth as a title that's bestowed upon that who rules from Keen Oin, the wasting tower on the first layer of the Grey Wastes. In fact, these terrible harbingers of pestilence are actually Ultraloths that have become transformed into their gruesome new form once they take on this title role of rulership. To claim this station, the aspiring Ultraloth must vanquish the current Oinoloth and take their place upon the Siege Malicious, a throne of disease and decay. In doing so, the new ruler gains mastery over pestilence, able to create, modify, or nullify any disease except that which twists their own form. This is a kingly reign that is anything but royal. The disease-riddled and debilitated Oinoloth spends most of their time orchestrating conflicts between the Yugoloth factions, a necessary strategy to prevent any one group from growing powerful enough to claim the throne. And the history of this title is a textbook of suffering and betrayal. Phraxus the Decayed, also known as Anthraxis, held the longest tenure, only to be briefly usurped by Mighty Claris. In a move that typifies Yugoloth betrayal, Mighty Claris deposed Anthraxis not with force, but by whispering a secret so terrible it compelled the Plague Lord to abandon his throne. Anthraxis would later reclaim his seat, and there are others that have held the title, such as Kexon, the Archgeneral of the Blood Rift, who ruled during the Silence of Lolth, his reign coming to a violent end as the silence faded, slain by Veyron, son of the Spider Queen. While the great Yugoloth lords rule from Gehenna and the Grey Waste, the daemonic fiend's true influence is often wielded by other high-profile figures whose ambitions have carried them beyond the confines of the rank-and-file hierarchy. Their stories breach beyond any such granted promotion. Each of these Arcanoloths use their skills along with guile and betrayal to seize power and gain their own 15 minutes of infamy. We start in the planar hub of Sigil, where secrets are a currency more valuable than coin. There we find that no Yugoloth has amassed more influence in the City of Doors than Shemeska the Marauder. She is an Arcanoloth whose fox-like face and opulent robes conceal the mind of perhaps the greatest of Yugoloth spies. From her gambling den, the Fortune's Wheel, she controls a vast information network consisting of spies, thieves, and assassins, proving that true dominion can be won not with armies, but with espionage. Sigil, as a hive for daemonic ambition, is also the home to the Arcanoloth Akin, who runs a respectable magic shop called the Friendly Fiend, a public front that perhaps masks deeper schemes. While deep beneath the city streets, a Yagnoloth named Incarus plots a more direct and violent conquest of his own. Other Yugoloths build their power by controlling the very institutions of their race. The Tower Arcane in Gehenna, the great repository of all Yugoloth knowledge, owes its existence to the genius of its architect, an Arcanoloth named Larsdana Apnuit. It was she who designed the tower and created the racial memory archive that grants Arcanoloths their vast lore. Her legacy, however, is one of betrayal. Her apprentice and lover, the sadistic Helicanolaith, also an Arcanoloth, usurped her position and now reigns as the tower's keeper. A grave reminder that even the greatest contributions are but stepping stones for the ambitious Yugoloth society. This web of knowledge also extends to figures like Ylaris, a necromancer in the service of the demon lord Orcus. However, dark rumors hint the Arcanoloth is secretly loyal to the Ultraloth bubonics, which segues us nicely into some notable Yugoloth warlords, those who achieved their station through brute force and dark pacts. And it's on the prison plane of Carceri where we find that secret master of Ylaris bubonics, an Ultraloth who presides over the construction of the ghastly Tower of Incarnate Pain, an unfinished monument built from the living bodies of petitioners. The goal of bubonics is to rival the General of Gehenna himself, at least until Orcus gets wind of the scheme. But bubonics is not alone in his military ambitions. Typhus, a misshapen ultraloth who resembles a hulking, hunchback mesoloth, commands the mercenary army known as the Infernal Front. Unfortunately, his brilliant tactical mind is offset and undone by a fatal lack of wisdom. The ultraloth Rixlanask deals directly with the Abyssal Demon Lords, having brokered an infamous deal to supply Demigorgon with countless Nikoloth shock troops, reaffirming their mercenary code that war is not just a profitable business, but also a path to personal tyranny. And finally, there are the true outliers, those whose paths have led them to strange and unique fates. The Bernoloth Harishik Apthul Kes, better known to the pages of history as the Blind Clockmaker, he operates from a personal demi-plane, manipulating time and fate towards cryptic and unknown ends. And there is the Ultraloth Xanagra the Fallen, offering perhaps the greatest anomaly as a being who took the form of a despairing solar angel, his presence an aura of hopelessness that can drain the life from Celestials. His existence as a true neutral entity further suggests that the Yugoloth ideology of pure evil is one, again, not without flaw and deviation, despite their claims otherwise. Each of these fiends, from the crime lords of Sigil to manipulators of time, all demonstrate a Yugoloth selfish truth, that the only authority that really matters is the one you carve out for yourself. We opened this treatise on the Yugoloths with a tragic story to demonstrate their capacity for callous carnage and destruction, and now I would like to close our discovery with a diametrically opposed tale that reveals their true genius for multi-layered deception. This is the tale of Maladur, as detailed in the 2nd edition adventure, Squaring the Circle. It's a masterwork of manipulation that sought to fundamentally alter the balance of power among the fiends of the lower planes. For eons, all fiends, regardless of alignment and ideology, possessed what appeared to be an innate ability to teleport error-free, a cornerstone power to be used in blood war tactics. The truth, however, was a secret known only to select and powerful greater Yugoloth lords. This ability was not innate at all, but was granted by a captive being, a solar angel named Maladur, captured ages ago by a Bernoloth named Daru Ib Shamik. The Bernoloth captured the Celestial by whispering such profane secrets into his ear that his mind and spirit shattered, transforming the divine being into the monstrous form of Maladur et Kavarik. This twisted being became a living conduit, able to grant perfect teleportation to any fiend whose true name it knew. Whenever a devil, demon, or even most daemons used its power, the casting fiend was unknowingly sending a subconscious request to Maladur, who read its mind and then fulfilled that request. However, this grand deception alone would not be enough. For Yugoloths, it's never enough. Ever the masters of the long game, the daemons decided to turn their greatest secret into their greatest weapon. The plan was a sublime act of psychological warfare, one that would absolve them of any wrongdoing and place the blame for the ensuing chaos squarely on the shoulders of the Yugoloths' favorite pawns, heroic mortals. And so they covertly seeded rumors across the plains of a tormented angel crying out for a rescue, a prisoner of fiends who could easily be saved, a hook baited with hope and lies. It would not be long before a party of heroes, convinced they were striking a blow for the divine and righteous, took up the cause and fought their way to Maladur's prison. Of course the heroes succeeded, aided by daemonic hands? Perhaps. Guided afterwards by daemonic whispers? Probably. In a final climactic act of deliverance, these heroes purified the corrupted Solar in the memory-wiping waters of the river Styx. Definitely a plan they made up all on their own, right? In that moment, the heroes believed they had won the day for divine good. In reality, they had triggered the final phase of the Yugoloths' master plan. Malidor's mind, scoured clean by the river Styx, forgot every true name it had ever known. Across the many battlefields of the Blood War, teleportation failed. Legions were stranded, ambushes thwarted, and a sudden terrible silence fell over the tactical landscapes. In the ensuing chaos, Yugoloth agents quietly reclaimed the now amnesiac Malidor, where they began the patient work of feeding him a new list of names, their own. If you enjoyed this descent into the 50 shades of deceit that is Yugoloth lore, be sure to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. And if you hunger for more fiendish secrets, consider joining my Patreon, where you can pledge your support for the price of a single soul coin, or in mortal terms, just a single $1 a month. There's no loophole in that bargain and no need to read the fine print. But you might just be able to sit in the director's chair like Darwin did for this deep dive. If you'd like to choose a topic for a future lore video on this channel, check out the Patreon links below. A sincere thank you to my Patreon and YouTube channel members, as well as to members of the channel's new Lore Council, Daniel Dragon, Darwin, Morgan, and Zombit. And thank you for listening. Let's do it again, soon. Until then, take care, my friends.